This is a pre-lecture video on rationales for overseas activities for the course Managing in a Global Economy. I'm David Frankel, a professor at Melbourne Business School. Let's get started. We define an overseas activity as any interaction of a company with a foreign market. Such activities include exporting and importing, as well as foreign direct investment. Why do companies engage in overseas activities? Why don't they source raw materials, combine the materials into finished products, and sell the products all within the confines of their own country? We begin by imagining what such a domestic-only business model would look like for the Chinese electric auto company BYD. First, a Chinese mining company would ship iron ore from a domestic mine to a Chinese steel company. Next, the steel company would process the ore into steel, which it would ship to the BYD plant. In addition, BYD's Chinese design team would send designs for new cars to the same BYD plant. Finally, the BYD plant would use the designs and steel to make cars, which it would sell to Chinese consumers. All of the components of BYD's supply chain, from the raw materials to the final customer, would be located entirely in China. We now modify this example to obtain 5 rationales for overseas activities. The first rationale is proximity to raw materials. In particular, suppose that all of the high-quality iron ore in China has been depleted. Australia, on the other hand, still has high-quality iron ore and is not too far from China. Thus, it makes economic sense to mine iron ore in Australia and ship it to China. The extraction of the ore must take place in Australia, where the mines are located. In this way, proximity to raw materials provides one rationale for overseas activities. Our second rationale for such activities is proximity to other companies. For instance, suppose that BYD is the only company that does vehicle design in China. On the other hand, Ford, Toyota, and GM all have design teams in Australia. In this case, BYD might want to set up a remote vehicle design team in Australia as well. BYD's 2 design teams can then collaborate with one another. There are 3 ways in which BYD may benefit from designing cars in close proximity to the design teams of other automakers. First, BYD gains access to a pool of vehicle designers should it need to increase its staff for a temporary project. This benefit is called access to a common labor pool. Second, proximity allows BYD's Australian design team to interact face-to-face with the design teams of other companies. These interactions will help BYD's team to learn about new developments in the industry, thus keeping BYD on the cutting edge of vehicle design. The name of this benefit is communication economies. Finally, there are some external services that vehicle design teams require in order to do their jobs. These include the fabrication of prototypes, the development of vehicle software, and crash testing. By creating a large market for such services, a cluster of design teams gives rise to economies of scale in their provision. This lowers the cost of acquiring the services for each team in the cluster. The name of this benefit is scale economies in intermediate inputs. The benefits of proximity to other companies was first recognized by economist Alfred Marshall in his 1920 textbook, Principles of Economics. The third rationale for overseas activities is product life cycle theory. The idea is as follows. In the early stage of a new product, like electric vehicles, a manufacturer does not know exactly which features customers value. The manufacturer must experiment by building different models and seeing how the market reacts. This process requires intensive interactions between the company's leadership, design team, and production floor. To facilitate these interactions, all of these activities tend to happen in the same place. Over time, the product becomes standardized. The intensive interactions are no longer needed. To reduce costs, a company may then outsource production to other countries that have lower wages and cheaper land. For instance, suppose that after a period of intense experimentation, BYD has designed a car model that it expects to produce for several years. Assume, moreover, that labor and land costs less in Thailand than in China. BYD may then shift production from China to a new auto plant in Thailand. The new plant receives steel from the Chinese steel plant and designs from BYD's Chinese design team. It uses them to manufacture cars, which it ships back to China for sale to Chinese consumers. Product life cycle theory was invented in the 1960s by Raymond Vernon, a professor at Harvard Business School. Outsourcing production to Thailand may also be motivated by the fourth rationale for overseas activities, comparative advantage. The rough idea is that a country should specialize in making products in which its relative productivity is highest. Let's make this more precise. Suppose that in 1 year, a Thai worker can either manufacture 10 cars or design 1 car. Thus, in Thailand, the opportunity cost of a new car design is 10. In other words, Thailand must forego 10 manufactured cars to produce 1 new car design. A Chinese worker, on the other hand, can either manufacture 20 cars in a year or design 10 new cars. Thus, China's opportunity cost of a new car design is 2. In order to produce 1 new car design, China need forego only 2 manufactured cars. Since the opportunity cost of designing cars is lower in China than in Thailand, we say that China has a comparative advantage in designing cars, while Thailand has a comparative advantage in manufacturing them. This implies that BYD can save money by designing its cars in China while outsourcing their manufacture to Thailand. This theory of comparative advantage was invented by economist David Ricardo in 1817. We now turn to our fifth and final rationale, proximity to customers. Suppose that BYD would like to sell its vehicles not only to Chinese consumers, but also to Europeans. For instance, it may think that it has a competitive edge that will let it gain substantial market share in Europe, thus raising its profits. Or BYD may believe that expanding output will let it realize greater scale economies or be in a stronger bargaining position vis-à-vis its suppliers. Suppose, however, that in a bid to protect its domestic auto industry, Europe has imposed steep tariffs on imports of Chinese vehicles. On the other hand, cars manufactured within the European Union are not subject to these tariffs. Hungary is a member of the European Union. It also has many skilled manufacturing workers and relatively low wages. Thus, BYD builds a second auto plant in Hungary. The new plant receives designs from BYD's team in China and imports steel from the Chinese steel plant. It uses these inputs to make cars, which it sells to European consumers. In this way, proximity to customers provides the fifth and final rationale for overseas activities. At the end of the day, BYD has become a global company with operations in China, Australia, Thailand, and Hungary. We conclude by summarizing the 5 rationales for a company to be active in other countries. The first is proximity to raw materials. The second is proximity to other companies, the benefits of which are access to a common labor pool, communication economies, and scale economies in intermediate inputs. The third rationale is product life cycle theory. The fourth is the theory of comparative advantage. And the final rationale is proximity to customers. This concludes the MGE pre-lecture video, Rationales for Overseas Activities. Thank you for watching.